Hi all. These are generally conversations between adults after the children have left the table. The language can be spicy and the subjects can get saucy. So if you're ready, this is the Southern Fork. Unscripted kitchen chats and also studio chats with some of the most interesting voices in the culinary South. I'm Stephanie Burt, a food and beverage writer who travels with her fork to write for a variety of publications, from magazines you might have on your coffee table to the website you love to visit for your favorite recipes. And I'm inviting you to come behind the scenes with me to get to know the people who make this Southern culinary landscape so special. I'm always hungry for the next bite, thirsty for that next sip, and ready for the next conversation. Let's dig in. The Southern Fork is proud to say that once again, the presenting sponsor for Season 8 is Townsend Automotive in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. First off, thanks to so many of you listeners out there who not only decided to purchase a vehicle from this family-owned business in the last 2 years, but also shared with them that it was directly because of their support of this show. That's what community, even in our virtual format, is all about. Second, Townsend Automotive, celebrating 49 years serving West Alabama, has been extending its reach so that you don't even have to be in the Tuscaloosa area to purchase a car from them. Nationwide vehicle delivery service is available for Southern Fork listeners, and it's something that makes buying just the right new or certified pre-owned vehicle even easier. Visit townsendhonda.com for current inventory, or, of course, if you're in West Alabama, stop in. Townsend Automotive always salutes local entrepreneurs, from restaurateurs to podcasters, and they welcome you to be part of a community that does the same. Charlotte, North Carolina, has a love affair with fast casual food. Maybe it's the brisk pace of the banking world, or the sprawl of roads that make commute times long. But whatever it is, the city doesn't shy away from standing in line and ordering counter service. One of its favorite spots is Yafo Kitchen, which has multiple locations and is brought up by Charlotteans almost every time I visit, with phrases like, "Have you had their hummus?" or "I just try not to go there more than once a week." And that's because of Shai Fargian, executive chef and partner at Yafo, who began this local chain with a dedication to making Charlotte fall in love with Middle Eastern food. Originally from Israel, Shai's cooking lessons began when he was a child alongside his grandmother. He served in the Israeli army for 7 years, eventually rising to serve as an operations officer, leading a brigade of 2,000 people. After retiring and enrolling in college, he began cooking in kitchens, moving through the ranks there too, then moving to the U.S., where Shai worked in New York City under restaurateur David Burke. In 2015, he and his wife Sharon moved to Charlotte, and in 2016, Yafo was born. Shai sources locally whenever he can, applies his love of operations to his culinary creativity, and as for that hummus, it's made in-house, and the restaurant serves 180 gallons of it a week. Welcome to the Southern Fork.
Hello.
Thanks so much for bringing me spices and hummus. That's basically why I invited you on the show. No, it's wonderful to have you on the show today. I have so many questions, and that's always a sign that I need to interview someone. We met last year and had a great meal. You know, one thing that really impressed me, and I wanted to start here, is that Yafo is a fast casual restaurant.
Yep.
And a lot of people feel like that's kind of the stepchild of the restaurant industry. And you had the opportunity when you moved to Charlotte to do whatever kind of restaurant. What attracted you to this category?
Well, I think there's a little flaw in the description, because when it starts with fast, the first thing your mind goes to is fast food.
Right.
And our food is not that fast. So, and then it is casual. I mean, we serve food in paper bowls. We also serve it in regular plates.
But you get it fast, but it doesn't take...
Faster. Yes, but it's
faster,
not,
casual.
I mean, we have several items on the menu that we cook to order. Mm-hmm. And that's where actually when people are struggling with it. Mm-hmm. Because if two people go through our queue and one of them gets their food immediately and the other one has to wait because we do Turkish beef kebabs to order, and I got to cook it to medium and it takes 6 minutes or 7 minutes, people don't have a lot of patience.
Oh, yeah.
with the fast part of it.
Right.
That said, for me, doing fast casual has allowed me to lower the price point and make it more approachable in a way that I can capture more audience. And I'm not depending on the wine sales, or I'm not depending on the marketing of like getting to people to come and sit down and spend $150 on a date night. Because if I look at the food that we make, I mean, we make food that's, if I would have put it on a plate, I could have charged more money for it. I could have done the same food in a different setting. And that's the amount of love and care that we give to it. The hummus that I brought you today takes 2 days to make. We use organic chickpeas from California and tahini that is shipped specifically for us from Israel. It's not like I went to McDonald's and just like piled something into the toaster oven.
Right. Or it's not like a big truck pulled up in the back.
Correct.
And just brought you, here's your bag of potatoes, here's your bag of whatever. Yeah.
So to conclude, I would say is we went for fast casual because we felt we can make our food more approachable and more educational to a broader crowd, I would say.
And that's an important point here. Would you consider yourself an Israeli chef?
I am.
It sounds like there's some education that you want to do as a chef. Like, that you're not just there going, I want to serve people food. You want people to learn about the culture through the food, right? And taste that. So one thing people probably heard me say about Yafo already, when I come to Charlotte, which is often, I ask people that I run into, and some of them are chefs and some of them aren't. And I say, where should I eat? Where do you like to eat? And they go, have you been to Yafo? And I remember I was like, what? Why am I hearing about this 5 times? And what's so great and what I loved about it, is that it isn't what you think it's going to be when you're a food writer like me. I think I'm biased to that idea of faster and of cues and all that kind of thing. But there are a lot of chefs out there that say, I can't do local because I'm doing fast casual. I can't source stuff. And sourcing is such a big thing about being a good chef. You have to source the best ingredients and then manipulate them. What would you respond saying to those chefs and saying, no, I do it? So that sourcing is a volume thing too,
so
right?
That's where I was. I was an officer in the military before I became a chef, and I was always taught in boot camp is that there's no such thing as I can't. There's only I don't want to. So it's just a mental state of mind, in my opinion. So for me to go and say I can't source good ingredients because I'm selling you this food for a lower price point is saying I'm not trying to figure out how to do it.
Good point.
The fast casual part of it gives me the advantage. So we feed almost 2,500 people a day. At that volume, I can purchase more food, and I move enough food for, let's say, US Foods or a broadliner to bring that to me, whatever I want. And I look at it two different, as we talked about earlier. I want to serve the best food I can. If it's local, it's a huge bonus for me. So I remember when we opened Yafo and I wanted to serve stuffed grape leaves, and I spent like 2 months trying to source grape leaves from North Carolina. I spoke to, back then it was Clark Barlow. And
Yeah.
He's like, oh, you do a lot of local wine. Can you get me vine leaves? And it was really hard. So then I figured, okay, what's the best product I can get? And for us, for example, our spices come from the same spice store that I used when I was a sous chef in Tel Aviv. If I didn't have the fast casual volume, if I was running a 75-seat chef restaurant, there's no way I could have put my hand on those ingredients.
Right.
Because I didn't have the volume to source it. Now, that said, it could also be on the flip side. When I opened Yafo, I had 9 different farmers I worked with, and we had one location. And then we grew, and I needed 700 pounds of tomatoes a week. And none of those farmers can provide what I needed. So at some point, it got unsustainable for me to try to work with so many different farmers because I didn't have the time and the mental capacity to work with so many vendors just to get what I needed to open the door. So we've had to find someone. We work with Barbie Farm here in Concord, North Carolina, and I meet with Brent Barbie, and in January, and I say, okay, this summer I'm going to use 2,000 pounds a week or 2,400 pounds a week of tomatoes, and he can source it for me. He grows it for us. Mm-hmm. But if I couldn't tell what my volume is, or if I had less of a volume, it would have been much more challenging for me.
Right. Sometimes all of those logistics and that math isn't a chef's strong suit. Because restaurateur is part of being a chef owner, right? Yeah. It's part of being a chef partner. So do you find joy in that? Do you find satisfaction in that part of the business?
I was an operations officer in my last position in the military, and I have a degree in supply chain and economics. So
yes.
So I do. And I also that's where a lot of, I know a lot of chefs I like numbers. Mm-hmm. I like what I do as the art form of creating food. But I also like numbers, and I personally get a lot of satisfaction of seeing how they work together, mm-hmm. and like costing and and portioning and making sure it's the same every time. That's probably our biggest challenge in any restaurant. Right. Consistency. So for me, talking to this, it's that sumac that we got, and like it comes from halfway around the world, and I had to overnight it one time because we didn't have enough, or we were busier than we expected. So those challenges for me are just as interesting as coming up with the next menu item.
Because of that, has that helped buffer this inflation thing that we're feeling now? A little.
It all comes eventually. The bill comes at the end. It's just because we had more stock in the U.S. than it came 2 months later.
Right.
But we've seen the increases. So we didn't do any price increases in first 5 years of Yafo, which was phenomenal. The next 2 years, we had to do 4 of them, like mm-hmm. almost every 6 months. And recently we had to do another one. But we also want to pay our dishwashers more and our line cooks more. And we found a way to do that in a sustainable business environment where, cost of dishwashers has gone up since we opened Yafo, probably 80%, almost mm-hmm. doubled.
Because you want them to stay.
We want them to stay because, first of all, I want them to be happy.
Right.
And then I can get them to stay. If somebody's going to be happy because when they leave me, I would be happy for them if they leave. Like, I'm never going to hold somebody back. But we want people to be happy. You got to pay them if you want them to stay with you and be happy.
Now, let's talk about a couple of the menu items that Charlotte has really gotten on board with that you had to educate about. I mean, I think we all know what hummus is. We love some bread. There are a lot of different varied menu items. Is there something that now you feel has become a favorite that was once kind of a maligned menu item?
Yeah. So probably two things. One is falafel. And we grind fresh falafel every day. We mm-hmm. hydrate our chickpeas, and we have a spice blend that we make in-house. And when we started, a lot of people would go down the line and it's like, what's falafel? Yeah, this is my best Southern accent. I'm sorry.
Let's hear it again.
Falafel.
Okay, okay. We'll go with it.
Falafel does go with my favorite Southern word, which is oil.
Oil.
Yeah.
Which is not oil. It's fried in oil. It's fried in oil.
Yes.
Okay, got it.
So when I the first time somebody asked me what's falafel, which is probably the most basic thing in Israel. It's like their national food there. And it took me a second. I was like, it's a hush puppy.
And you,
and that's how I created that. I was like, it's a hush puppy, but it's chickpeas, not corn.
and people are like, oh, get it.
I get it. And then they tried it. So.
And you didn't feel bad about that.
No.
That is so true. Like, I was just watching a great video about dumplings from CBS Good Sunday Morning. I like to watch these little clips on YouTube sometimes about food. And of course, I already know this, but it was just another example of dumplings all around the world, noodles all around the world, fried bread all around the world. And so, hush puppies.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is a fried dumpling, I would say.
Yeah. Right.
I had yesterday, I saw one of my employees who's Filipino trying to explain to a Southern guest what a matzo ball soup is. And he was really lost in his words. And I was like, it's a dumpling. Because at the end of the day, there's so many things that are very similar in different cultures.
Right.
Jambalaya, arroz con pollo, paella, makluba, which is the Middle Eastern version. Same thing. Just rice and other ingredients cook in the same pan so they can infuse flavors. But if you conceptually, it is basically the same idea crossing multi-cultures, depending on the ingredients of that region, what type of rice they use, what was available. So when we started Yafo, we really felt like I had to explain to people that falafel is like a hush puppy. Or we had laffa bread, which we used to bake in-house, and nobody knew people know what pita is. They knew what a lavash is sometimes, or what a flatbread is. But when I had to explain to them what laffa was, which is almost like a naan, and then 5 years later, we took it off the menu and hell broke loose. And I was getting threatening emails, and to this day.
Don't ever threaten chef because he takes something off a menu, y'all.
So 2 years later, I do interviews, and the first question is when's the laffa coming back?
Oh, really? So, yeah.
So I think we were able to educate people, and I'm not saying it from a self-righteous way. Other people know what's good for them, what's tasty. If you look at, I like to say the example of wine. People look at wine like, I don't know if it's good or not. Like, how would I'm not a sommelier. I'm not a wine connoisseur. I'm like, taste it. If it tastes good, it's good. And that's how I approach my food.
You just got back from a trip. Those are creativity infusions, right? You were just in Tel Aviv and you're there on a research trip. You're probably there to visit friends and family too while you're at it. But why do you think that that's important? You are from Tel Aviv. I mean, do you need to go back? Why? Because I know people follow other chefs on Instagram that do research trips. And, why do you need to go back and teach or inform your palate?
Well, first of all, my family's there. And that's a good way for me to, say, immerse my daughters. I have 3 daughters, to immerse them in that culture, which is important for me. On our last day there, we went to a restaurant that my wife and mine's favorite restaurant. And when we were trying to explain to my daughters how we love that place, and it's so many memories. And my oldest daughter, she's 7, she's like, I can't eat any more Israeli street food. I want pad thai. I'm like, this is the best pita in the world. And she's like, I want pad thai. So, that's the main thing. And the second thing is I'm from north of Israel, the Galilee originally. I lived and cooked in Tel Aviv. But I see myself as serving regional Middle Eastern cuisine. I could say Israeli. I can say I grew up 20 minutes from southern Lebanon. So very similar in cuisine. So I look at food as geography. I serve Middle Eastern food, but that food also still progresses and it still develops. And sometimes
because it's a language, it's a living language. Yeah.
Depending on what's more available. And so pandemic, everything, I haven't been home in 3 years. And sometimes you got to refresh your flavors and refresh your memory, and you discover more and more layers of things. I think the biggest example, my mother is American. My mother was born in Portland, Maine. My father was born in Tehran, Iran. I grew up in Israel. And my mother brought with her chopped liver. And she used to make chopped liver. My father's family used to butcher a lamb for the Jewish high holidays. So they had an abundance of lamb fat. So instead of using schmaltz or chicken fat for her chopped liver, my mother used lamb fat. Now I think about it as a chef, I'm like, oh my God, crazy fusion. This is amazing. If I'd seen it on the menu in New York, it would have been insane. But that's what we had. And that's something like when I just went and I looked at my mother's recipe for chopped liver and it says put lamb fat in there. I'm like, oh, so that's where.
Right. That's where it starts.
Yeah.
So when you come back to Yafo and you have to put new things on the menu, or you want to put new things on the menu because things move on and move off, right? Yeah. Hopefully they don't have riots every time, but you try new menu items. You have probably some seasonal things occasionally that you like to do. Do you have to scale them? Because you're having to teach across multiple outlets, multiple people to do it. It's not like a restaurant where you can run expo, right? And you can see that coming out. Does that operations background come into play when you're doing that?
That's where it comes into play on the largest scale.
Yeah.
And most of it, so when I try to build a new dish, if I have the inspiration or I collaborate with our chef, we have 4 chefs at Yafo, different background from Southern to French to Mexican to Northeast American. When I come up with a new dish, I come up with a concept and then I get with them. I'm like, how do you think we can execute it? Mm-hmm. And we're so fortunate. All of them have been with me for over 3 years. So they know the operation and they know their limitations. And sometimes they'll be like, yeah, that's not happening. So you can cook it at home. You can do it at a special dinner or whatever you want to do. Or sometimes they just need, so I cook it for them. And then I'm like, okay, here are the flavors. How do we make this happen across 3 different locations with 3 different chefs and 14 different line cooks, in a way that it could taste the same every time. And that's probably the biggest, that's where art and science for me come together. And how do you take something that's so creative outlet and artistic in form of creating a new dish and turning it into a science of you put 2 ounces of this and 1 ounce of this and wait 30 seconds and then it's going to taste the same. You
touched on something that I'd like to circle back to, and that's the idea of saying no sometimes to new things on the menu. There's nothing that'll take a restaurant down faster, except for Cheesecake Factory, down faster than not having editing on the menu. Saying no to some things, even though they're lovely and they're great and they do fit and we do know how to make them, but we just don't have the time, or we just don't have the talent right now, or we just can't execute this consistently. Do you have a folder somewhere of things that you're like, well, I'll just do that at a collab dinner?
Yes. I have a 7-year-old, it's more probably, it's 9-year-old note on my iPhone with ideas from the time I worked in New York. When I would see something, I'm like, oh, it's a good idea. Maybe I'll make that one time. It came to me when I was watching a TED show about creativity and poem writing, actually. And it was, if you have ideas, you got to write them down because they're never going to come back to you.
That's very true.
So every time I have an idea, I just write it down. If I'm at a restaurant and I see a dish and there's a component that I really like, I'm like, oh, I'm going to write this down. As a writer, I'm sure you have the same, oh, this just hit me.
Well, I actually have been struggling with that because I also write scripts. I write the intros for this, and it's a different style of writing than writing for print. And so I will hear it. And the other day I was in a rush doing something and I'm headed out of town and I got like this beautiful phrase, this whole thing of a script that I have been working on, and I didn't write it down and it's gone.
Can you record it?
I can record it. And that's the thing that I said, oh, that's so pretty. I'll remember it.
Yes.
And it's gone.
So what's interesting, so every few months I try to review that note. Sometimes it's every 2 months. Sometimes it's every 6 months. And what I've noticed that very rarely there's things that repeat, but they're very rare. So it's really long because it's 9 years old.
Right.
But if I look at it and I skim through it, there's some items that repeat on different sections in different forms. I'm like, okay, this has to go somewhere.
Right. So it's coming up. It's there.
This is inside of me and it's got to go on the plate. So we did a dinner in Greenville, South Carolina, at the Lazy Goat a couple months ago. And I've had this dish that I've been wanting to do for years and years and years. And then finally that's where I went. Because there's no way that dish, it was a fennel steak. It was,
that sounds really good right now.
It was a fennel poulet. So we finished it like a butter braise in a pan and everything. There's no way I could do it in 4 to 5 minutes at a Yafo.
Right.
So it does limit what we can do, but we find different outlets for those things. And I think my chefs and our director of operation, he probably puts me in check the most. I'm like, Kevin, I have this idea. It's like, yeah, that's not going to happen.
But it's nice to have that. I posted a quote today. Dorothy Parker says, creativity is a wild mind and a disciplined eye. Yeah. So you have to let the kite string go, right? You have to let it run. And then you have to have enough willpower to pull it back in when you need it.
You got to have the string. You can't just let it fly. Like you have to have the string.
You do. You do. You have to hold the string. That's a very good point. Well, I cannot wait to have Yafo as soon as we're done with this interview. It won't be my first time, Southern Fork listeners, because you know that I make sure that I sample the food of every chef that I have here on the show. So lots of times that's years in the making, right? But I want to know, you're always planning and pumping. What is making you hungry? What are you interested in right now?
Right now, I'm actually interested, doing more Yafos. That's one, but maybe doing a more elevated version of it. Because I feel like we have the purchasing power and we've educated the guests enough that we could make it potentially work as a business of doing like some sort of a full service. I don't know if it's going to happen or not, but...
And then all the notes could be there.
Yes. I'm like, I already have a menu for like 7 years. There's enough dishes in there for 7 years of restaurant, but just something, and specifically like being in Israel, and the food scene in Tel Aviv is incredible. And I've eaten in some Pellegrino top 50 restaurants in Tel Aviv, and I've eaten in food stalls in the market in Tel Aviv. And it was all, every time I ate, I'm like, I could do this at Yafo, or I could do this in Charlotte. And that's kind of like where we want to grow. And I have chefs that have been with me for a really, really long time, and they deserve to grow as well.
Right. I hear that so often. We want this business to be sustainable and to be a career for those people in the business with us, right?
Yeah.
What is one aspect of your job that meshes like a puzzle piece with an aspect of your natural personality?
So I think we touched on that.
I think so too.
The detail orientation.
Right.
And I don't know if
I feel like you could teach classes on this, and like I could just be like, for $250, I will give you Shai's number. And he will come teach your staff.
No, I think part of it, so coming from the military and doing operations in a maybe that's why I fit in the kitchen so well, because I went from an environment,
it's a brigade
that's like
environment,
high stressed. Nobody's dying in the kitchen most of the time, so that's better. And it is less hours than the military. But going from a place where like my job was as an operations officer was to figure out how to take an idea of the officer, the commanding officer or anything, and how to materialize it and how to make it happen. That's something that became part of my responsibility, part of my personality. And that's what I use in the restaurants every day. I take ideas, whether if it's mine, if it's my business partner, Frank, Kevin, our director of operations, of any of our chefs or managers. And you'd never hear me say no right away. I'm like, okay, how do we make it happen? Sometimes it materializes and sometimes it doesn't. But my job is to make the operation fit.
Investigate that. Yeah. Investigate the process.
Yeah.
That's cool. I wish I had that. What is one thing keeping you up at night?
Other than the obvious kids answer, my other kids, like our people. We're so fortunate. Chefs, managers, all of our leadership team at Yafo has been with us for several years through COVID, through everything. We were able to retain, because we're fast casual, we weren't as we could weather the storm better. We didn't rely on the $100 bottle of wine or on the alcohol sales. It was mostly takeout. And I just want them to be happy. A lot of it because they're happy. My happiness depends on their happiness, but a lot of it because I've created such like personal relationship with them. They're like family to me. And I'd rephrase it. They're like siblings to me, not kids.
Right. I understand that feeling. Yeah. But you do feel a level of responsibility. And that's probably where that children comment, that reference comes in, because I hear a lot of people say that, sometimes, but it sounds like you learn from them too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then again, like my younger brother is also a chef in Israel, and the more I talk to him, I'm like, oh, this is how I talk to my chefs too. So
that's cool. Now I have something I reserve for Southern Fork guests, and this is my magic picnic basket question. So in this magic picnic basket, I can bring you whatever you want. I can go back in time to ask somebody to make one more bite of something you wish you could have again. I can source for you, and I can cook a little bit. I can make some hush puppies if you need it. So I would love to bring you some of your favorite things that really bring you life. They don't have to go together. It doesn't have to be a formal picnic. I just want listeners to know you a little bit through your favorite foods.
First of all, I tend to correlate food with people, the people I eat it with. So before I take any food out, I like to have my family in the picnic. I got, like I said, I have my wife, my 3 daughters, very close with my siblings who live in Israel, but we talk all the time. So for me, eating, obviously it matters what you eat, but eating it with the people that you like elevates the experience.
Absolutely.
Now the food itself, really important. I really like fresh bread. There is a place, actually they have all over the world. It's called Miznon by Chef Eyal Shani. And they do like gourmet pitas. So that's something that they have a chicken liver pita. That's incredible. Wow. There's one in Chelsea Market in New York.
Yeah. Well, I've been there.
So, chicken liver, green schug, tahini, and, tomato seeds. They juice the tomato over it and on a perfectly baked pita. And that's, for me, that's all I need. I like to have a drink. I drink, arak, which is an anise, drink. It's, that's something that's brings me home. And probably, as looking at my full circle, probably a Shake Shack smash burger. I like burgers.
But I'd probably have to get like 6 or 7 of them for the whole group, right?
We got to
because you can't just eat one in front of them.
A double.
Oh, a double.
I can't even eat one like a one patty. It has to be a double. No, I like grilling. For us growing up, we would grill all the time. So when we'd go to a picnic, we would bring the grill with us and just grill at the picnic site. So any kebabs or grilled fish or anything that goes on a charcoal grill.
Perfect.
That's in my picnic.
Well, that sounds great. Maybe I can just hang out on the side.
Yeah.
All of this sounds really lovely. Well, if people want to learn more about Shai and Yafo Kitchen, if you're in Charlotte and you haven't eaten here, you're probably one of the 2 people that haven't, because everybody keeps telling me it's so good. It's so good. I love it. And my vegetarian sister, Courtney, who I have to shout out to today, not that she listens to the podcast, but she was the first person to turn me on to this food, and I am so excited to have the chance to chat with you. If you take the time to go to southernfork.com, you'll find images of this delicious cuisine as well as the face behind the voice. If you like what you hear, more than 300 episodes in the archives. I've been doing this for a while, and honestly, we're here, season 8. I feel like I'm just getting started. I have a lifetime of food to eat and even more people to interview. So thank you so much for taking time and bringing me some amazing spices. What a surprise. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Hello and welcome to Talking with a Mouthful. I need to use this little segment today as a confessional. There was a time when I bought 2 tubs of grocery store hummus a week for my lunches. Now, this hasn't been in the last 6 or 7 years, but I was not shopping at a Middle Eastern deli. I was just buying it at a place like Publix or Harris Teeter or Albertsons or Kroger. Bet you have something like that in your city, or you at least know of those grocery store chains. And so I would buy a couple of these little plastic tubs and a bag of baby carrots, which, let's be honest, isn't a baby carrot, but shaved down. And that's, a whole nother talking with my mouth full for another day. I don't buy those anymore either. And some Stacy's pita chips, which I still do buy, but not very often because I will eat the whole thing. But that was often my lunch: carrots, hummus, and pita chips. And I did this for years. And then I started eating more Israeli and Middle Eastern food. We had Butcher and Bee in Charleston with beautiful, great mezz plate that included hummus. There was Shia in New Orleans. There's Zahav in Philadelphia. There were so many better options that opened my eyes to the really beautiful, well-made dish. And it was light years away from that grainy container of hummus that was still garlicky and still taste of chickpeas and tahini, but just didn't have the texture that I'd grown accustomed to. So I tried making my own. And although I do a lot of things homemade in my house, I kind of got off that bandwagon after a few weeks. I just kind of got it out of my system. And I haven't really been buying hummus. Now, there are a couple brands, one brand out of Asheville, North Carolina, that does a really good job of a tub hummus. But really, there is nothing like well-made restaurant quality hummus. And I wanted to share that with you today because I am also on a food journey, and sometimes that food journey includes a lot of plastic containers that come into my house, and something that, I learn is not the best example of a dish that is really revered dish for many, many people. So anyway, if I can do it, you can do it too. And so nowadays, if I'm in Charlotte, of course, I'm always going to go by Yafo and get some hummus. And if you know me and you know that I travel road trips, I often have a cooler in the car so that I can carry stuff home from wherever I am. But there is often a Middle Eastern deli in your mid-sized southern city. So if you're in the South or not, I would suggest, if you want to buy local and support your local community, lots of times those Middle Eastern delis have wonderful hummus and they serve a lot of it. So it is fresh and you can get a container of it to go. And of course, if you're in Charlotte, I'm always going to suggest Yafo to go by and get that. But once you serve that on your charcuterie board or your plate for, I don't know, some big football game that's happening this weekend, I don't even know who's playing. That's not true. I'm just being silly. Once you have that kind of hummus, it'll be really hard to go back to those little plastic containers. Thanks so much for listening and following along on my journey. I hope it inspires your journey, and I will be right here next week.
You've been listening to The Southern Fork. I can't wait to bring you more culinary conversations. But in the meantime, I have one question. Are you going to eat all that?